Hi, I'm Yegi. I'm an entrepreneur and success coach who wants it all. Family, luxury, career, and the freedom to do whatever I want, whenever I want. And I'll do whatever it takes to get there. I created the Yegi Project to document my journey and inspire others to do the same. My mission is to change the world by influencing and leading others to do what they love and live fulfilled lives. Hello. Welcome back to the Yegi Project. Today we have Andrew Allemann, who is a master in domain names. So he has been in this business for over 19 years, and he specializes in creating, building, selling domain names. And of course, for our audience who are entrepreneurs, he will also talk about and discuss how to select the correct domain name and what that means for you or your business. Now, he has been quoted in Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and NPR. So he comes with a vast of experience and knowledge, and I'm so excited to interview him. Please tell our audience, who are you and how did you get started in your business?
Sure. So I've been registering domain names since I was in college in the late 90s with the goal of building websites from them. And so for the past 19 years, about 19 years ago, I started a blog about the business. So there are, believe it or not, there are lots of people who buy and sell domain names, and in the companies where you go register domain names, most commonly GoDaddy, for example. It's kind of a niche industry, but there are a lot of people that are interested in it. So every weekday, I write about what's going on in the business and things that might be relevant to people that are in that business. And I've been writing that blog for close to 2 decades now, and I think I checked lately and it was 15,000 blog posts over those years. So I've written a lot about the industry.
Now, from your background and knowledge, can you just, for our newer entrepreneurs, can you start off with telling us why is it so important to pick a right domain?
Yeah, I mean, a domain name is your storefront, right? And it's your address. And much like you don't want to be in a hard to find place, if you were having a bricks and mortar store, the same thing is the case online, right? You need something that is easy for people to find, and you also need something that is easy for them to remember so they don't get confused. And a great domain also gives you credibility. It shows that you know what you're doing, and it can make you actually seem bigger than you actually are.
And how about for domain investing? Because that's what you've been blogging about, right? The
Right.
niche business about it. I know it used to be even a bigger market when the internet first came out and boomed, and a lot of people were making a lot of money on it. But in today's world, is there still opportunity there for somebody who wants to get into it? Or what advice would you give to somebody that thinks, oh, maybe I can do this as a side hustle? Because that's a thing
Right.
nowadays. Everybody wants to, get as many opportunities as they can to earn extra income.
That's right. Yeah. So, I mean, thinking about the size of the market now, it's actually quite a lot bigger than it was back early on. But it's also harder to get into, right? Which you alluded to. A lot of the opportunities have passed, or it's more expensive to do it now. But that doesn't mean it's too late to become a domain name investor. That said, I would caution anyone who wants to invest in domain names, and by that we mean buying domain names that you hope to sell to someone in the future for more money than you bought them for, to really study the market and understand it well before you get into it. You can do that in a number of places. For example, there's a domain forum called namepros.com. You can read my site, domainnamewire.com, where I teach and provide advice and tips and resources. And then there's a course you can take at domainacademy.com that's fairly affordable as well, which teaches you how to look for good domain names, how to value domain names, how to choose the right names. And I said it because I see a lot of people who are like, hey, this seems like a great opportunity. They go out and spend lots of money registering domain names, only to find out that they're registering names that will never sell or are very unlikely to sell. And so if you spend a lot of time researching and understanding the market, you'll do a better job selecting names and have a much higher likelihood of becoming a profitable domain name investor.
So, what's the next step after? Let's say I have this great idea, I've done my research, I know what the market may want in the near future. What's my next step? So, I purchased the domain through one of the sites like GoDaddy, and I'm sure you have a bunch of resources on your website, the domain name wire, right? And we'll link all of that below for our listeners. But what's the next step? How do you kind of seek out people to buy it, or do you just kind of leave it for somebody to reach out to you?
Oh,
What's the
sure, sure. Yeah. So if you're buying that domain name as an investment, there are several ways to sell that domain name. So one thing you want to do is put up a page on that domain that says this domain is for sale. And there are lots of free services that do that, or they only charge you a commission, I should say. They're free until you sell your domain name. GoDaddy even has one. So if you register your domain at GoDaddy, you can say, I want to list this domain for sale, and I want you to put up a page saying it's for sale. And another thing to do is to list that domain name in domain marketplaces. So GoDaddy owns one called Afternic. There's another one called Cedo. And so if you do that, you get in front of a lot of people, because when someone searches on GoDaddy or another domain name registrar, it'll say this domain is for sale. So example.com is for sale and it's $5,000. Click here to buy the domain name. So there are two things. One is getting that for sale page. We call it a for sale lander up on the domain name. So then if someone types in that domain name, they'll see, hey, it's for sale, and they can click through and buy it. And listed on the marketplaces. So if anyone's searching, they'll see it as for sale.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. For our listeners who are interested, how you got started in this line of work, because it is very specific and niche. Can you please share your story? How did you end up here?
Yes, well, I could say, I have a podcast about domain names too, and it's one of the common questions I ask people. How did you get into this? And everyone has an interesting story. It'll be like someone had to register a domain name for a business they started, right? And then they're like, this is kind of interesting. I needed a domain. Do other people need names? Or someone was, a researcher at a university in the 90s and they got turned on to it. So it's interesting. In my case, in the 90s, I wanted to build websites, and you, of course, had to have a domain name. Back then, domain names were really expensive just to register. I say really expensive in that you had to register for 2 years, and it cost $70. And as a college student, that seemed like a lot of
Yeah.
money. Now, depending on where you register it, you can get a .com domain for $10 or so. So I registered domain names to build websites, but then I also was like, hey, this is kind of interesting. And at the time, of course, there were lots of stories of people selling domains for a lot of money. So I registered some more names and didn't register nearly enough. I should have done a lot more, but again, I didn't have the budget. But that's how I got into it. And then in 2005, there were no daily blogs covering the business of domain names, so I decided to start one. And it started as a hobby, and it turned into a business over time as companies in the space asked me to advertise on that on the site.
Wow, that's very interesting. Now, can you tell our listeners a little bit about your podcast as well? Because you did mention it, and also I was curious if you wanted to share your story about the domain podcastguest.com, because
Oh,
that is
sure.
something we actually use in my business as well.
That's great. Yeah. So the podcast is called the Domain Name Wire Podcast, and it accompanies the website domainnamewire.com. And I interview people. A lot of times they're entrepreneurs that spend a lot of money on a domain name, or it's someone who has tips and tricks for domain investors, that sort of thing. And we're up to, 470 something episodes. It's a weekly show. So you can do the math there. I've been doing it for quite a few years. And it's a very niche audience, but it's a well-received podcast. Podcastguests.com was a business that I came up with in 2016, I believe. I had been podcasting for a couple years at that point, and I was having trouble finding new and interesting guests to come on my show. And so I looked around to see if there was some sort of service where I could easily and for
Wow.
free get people. And there was nothing out there, right? There were services that charged you a lot of money to find guests. So I created it. And it grew and it grew and it grew. And at one point, we had over 40,000 users. And let's see, at the end of 2022, so a little bit over a year now, I sold it to someone else who I really felt could take that business and take it to the next level.
Wow, what an opportunity. And, I want our listeners to pay attention to that. That's literally the definition of an entrepreneur and how you start a business. You see what is missing, or you see what problem there is that you can solve. And the best way is just literally observing yourself and your business. Now, it really sounds like you did that twice already. From your story that we heard so far, you did that when it came time for the blogging, for talking about that business, and then again for your podcast, you did it again because you were like, okay, well, I want interesting guests, but how do I find them? I can't just one-on-one just reach out to people. It's easier to put a platform out there and have people build a community, basically, that we can all connect. And I'm so grateful for that too. So thank you for that, because it really helps out my podcast as well. We do use it.
Good. I'm glad you're finding it useful. It's very gratifying to hear people that are like, I've talked to some people who are like, yeah, I was about to give up on podcasting because it was so hard to find guests, and now I've got 6 months of interviews, lined up and that sort of thing. So it's great to hear that you're finding it useful.
Now, also in my past entrepreneurial journey, I've made a mistake to sometimes be afraid to sell something, have that as my exit strategy. And you've said it so comfortably that, you felt like it was time to let go of that and somebody else can take it to the next level. How was that process of making the decision, okay, do I sell this? Because I have this opportunity right here. Somebody wants to buy it. And of course, you can make a profit when you're selling it. Or do I hold on to it and maybe it's going to, turn into something even greater and you can later on have a bigger return on your investment. So how was that decision making? Because I could see a lot of entrepreneurs kind of getting stuck there and making that mistake.
Right. Yeah, I mean, look, there's no easy answer to that, right? And in fact, at one point, after I'd been running the service for 2 or 3 years, someone reached out about acquiring it, and it would have been at a much, much, much smaller number than I ended up selling it for, because it was a much smaller service at the time, much smaller platform. I think everyone has their own reasons, right, for selling, and you need to think those through. And in my case, there was some kind of personal, hey, I wanted to spend some time on something else with family and that sort of thing. So you really need to think about your situation and what you'll do with both the time and the money that it frees up. In my case, I wasn't actually, the platform kind of ran itself, so I wasn't spending a lot of time on it. I guess I should say not a lot of time dedicated to it, but it was taking up a lot of mind share, right? I was thinking about it throughout the day and that sort of thing. So, and also running the domain name side, I was juggling 2 different things, right? So I was having to shift from podcast to domain names, back to podcast, back to domain names, that sort of thing, which can be a lot. So, looking back 15 months ago, having sold it, I still don't know if it was the right decision. I know the new owner is doing great with it, and I'm sure he's happy with the purchase, and I'm glad to see that. It's one of those things where you want the new owner of the business to be successful, and you also don't want to kick yourself for selling it.
Of course, it's a hard thing, but I think you've mentioned it, or I think the answer to the question, and you've mentioned it while talking about it, is really like at that moment, like you said, is what do you want your focus on? And it kind of sounded like you asked yourself, okay, do I have the time and energy and dedication? Like, do I want to invest in this and grow it? Or is it time to let it go because you had other priorities and other focuses? And I think in entrepreneurship, it's so important for us to make that decision, because when our focus is divided into 2, 3, 4 projects, like it or not, no matter how much we are devoted, especially if there's family involved as well, because a lot of our energy goes in our family too and our personal lives, it's not likely that you can give your 100% to two jobs, two projects, or two
Right.
different businesses.
Right.
So I think that's kind of something to think about for entrepreneurs out there who have many focuses. Maybe, focus on one thing at a time. That's definitely something I've learned along the way. And that's a mistake I keep making because I think that's a very common entrepreneurial
Right.
person's personality. You just want to take on things, you want opportunities, you take risks. But what has your experience been with that? What advice would you give me or other entrepreneurs who are still trying to hang on to like two, three businesses, but they're
Right.
kind of suffering or struggling between that balance?
Yeah, and I should say I'm not opposed to running multiple businesses. I'm starting something
Okay.
new now. I know people who successfully do it.
Okay.
I know one guy who has several kind of job sites in various industries, and then he spins up other things. So some people can do it, but I would say it can be a challenge. And think about is r- is running several things keeping you from making one of them very successful?
Oh, okay. That's a
Because you
great
need to
question.
dedicate the time to it. And then also know your limitations, right? Some people are really good at starting things. They aren't really good at operating them. Other people are really good at operating, but not starting. And so knowing your limitations and your strengths there, I think is very important as well.
Yes, and I've learned along the way too is like you said, once you do realize your limitations, let's say you are a great creative person who starts a business, you come to a point where it has grown, you need help, you need to hire somebody to operate or manage because that might not be your strong suit. So,
Sure,
um,
sure. Yeah.
I guess I could see, for me, I've struggled trying to make too many things successful. It's one thing has always taken off, and my energy, I haven't had time to focus on the next thing. But I think along our conversation, what I'm kind of realizing is that there are people who can actually do it, and if that is your dream, you definitely can figure out how to do it. But maybe the best solution would be to hire more people in order to run certain things, so you don't have to fully be thinking about and managing many
That's an
people.
excellent point, and I think that's an option other than selling a business too, right? Is if you want to remove yourself from it day to day. First of all, a business that can be sold is one where you can be removed. Someone else can be
Hmm.
slotted in to run it. Otherwise, it's not really a saleable business, if you will, a sellable business. But yeah, is bring someone in, and I part of the reason I wasn't spending much time on the podcast platform is that I had brought someone else in to do a lot of the work, right? So I was
Excellent.
just managing part of it that took 3, 4, 5 hours a week, whereas they were doing many more hours, spending many more hours on it.
Excellent. Well, now let's get back to getting to know you a little bit better, Andrew. I
Sure.
love to get to know my guests, and as a podcast host, I'm sure you ask questions to other people, but it's fun to get interviewed sometimes. So,
Sure.
what is one thing that most people don't know about you?
Most people don't know about me. Gosh, I don't. I'm not that interesting. So,
No
if I'm not in front of the
surprises.
computer, I'm usually out on the pickleball court, and so that's what I like to do in my spare time. I've been playing for boy about 10 years now,
Oh, wow.
and so I enjoy that. That's what I enjoy doing when I'm not working.
Excellent. Now, the next question, just the first thing that comes to mind is if you can change one thing in the world with a magic wand, what would it be?
I think divisiveness. I've as I've gotten older, I don't like to be around kind of the negativity and that sort of thing that we have a lot of in our world right now. And I think it'd be great. I mean, obviously, you're always going to have people with different opinions, but kind of the cutthroat divisiveness, especially that we're experiencing right now in the United States.
Yeah, definitely. Now, what has been your biggest challenge in your work or personal life that has gotten in your way of success in the past, and what did you do to overcome it?
Yeah, well, one of the things, if I could go back and talk to myself 20 something years ago, would have been to learn how to code. It's something that I just never really picked up, even though I kind of have a coding style of mind. I'm very kind of
Uh-huh.
numbers and systems oriented.
Analytical.
Yeah. And so, it's always held me back because I've had to count on someone else to develop things. And I don't know that one of the things I thought about doing after I sold my business was to learn how to code.
Yeah, it's
And,
never too late, right? Go back to school.
you're like, oh, I'll do that next week. I'll do that next week. And then so the new business I'm starting, of course, I went out and hired developers for it, and,
It's
but
probably a smarter business decision, but like I said, as entrepreneurs, we want to do everything and we want to have control and fully understand. And I
right.
totally relate to you. I've been doing the same thing with digital marketing. So my business heavily relies on digital marketing, so the whole analytics thing, all of that, SEO. So I've been very determined to take a certification course and really be a master at it, and I never get around to it. So I always hire other people, but in the back of my head, it always like, are they doing the best job? Do they really know? So it's hard to not know exactly the ins and outs of what somebody
Right.
is doing if you're an entrepreneur, but I think it's smarter. It's smarter
Right.
to delegate. It's part of delegating, but I totally
You're
could
right.
relate to you in that
You're
aspect.
right.
So you've been in the business world doing your own thing for about 19 years. That's a lot of our listeners' dream, right? So what advice do you have to young entrepreneurs or older entrepreneurs who are new in the business world for starting or being successful in a business that they can own or run for a long time, right? Because a lot of times, a lot of people start and kind of give up on a business idea.
Mm.
But what's kind of your secret in the longevity of domain names?
The hardest part, though, I think for a lot of people is just starting, right? A lot of people want it to be perfect before they launch anything. Podcast guests, for example, now it's a pretty cool platform where you can do all these things online and find guests and stuff. When I started, it was just an email list. I had a couple hundred people on there, and I would, send out an email. I think it was once a week at the time, like, hey, here are some opportunities, and fill out this form. I used Google Forms, that sort of thing. So it was really basic, and it was just kind of like, hey, let's try this, see if it works. And then if it does work, build it from there. And another interesting thing about it is the business model. I kind of listened to how people were using it and what they wanted, and that's how I built a business model from it.
Wow.
So I had an idea of how to make money from it, which I think is important, but it was also like, hey, if I get this out there, people would tell me what would make this
What
better and
they
what they'd be willing
need.
to, what people would be willing to pay for, right? Which is
Wow.
ultimately important, right?
Very impressive, actually. That's I think the best advice to get started because a lot of
Mhm.
times we can get stuck just researching, learning,
It
reading, reading,
it
reading,
doesn't have to be
talking about
perfect.
it, and
Doesn't have to be perfect when you launch.
it
Same,
just
same thing
holds
with the
us back.
podcast, right? I spent so much time. I probably delayed launching my podcast for 6 months because I was like, oh, I need to have a perfect voiceover intro, and I need to have this and that. And the reality is that, look, your first few podcasts, just when you look back on them, they aren't going to be great anyway, because
Yeah,
you're
no,
you're still
anything you look
learning.
back at, yeah.
Yeah,
Anything
you're
you look back at.
yeah.
The key is to just take action and move on, right? And
That's right.
don't,
Yeah.
and if it's content, especially if it's audio, video, we're so hard on ourselves. Just my personal thing has been don't even go back and look at it. If you feel like it's going to bother you and you're going to
Yeah.
overanalyze it, because I've worked with clients who do that, don't even look at it. Who
Mm,
cares? Put it out there, let it do its thing, and hire somebody else to edit your
right. Right.
content. And you don't
Right.
have to like analyze it and worry about it too much before you launch it.
Right.
But getting back to getting to know you a little bit more, I also love asking my guests because happiness is key, right? Anything we do is mainly because we want to be happy, right? So, what does a happy and fulfilled life look like to you now? And what did it look like to you when you were much younger?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really tough thing for people, right? Because I had a vision 20 years ago of what I wanted my life to be like, um, and you know, a 20-year-old you doesn't know what a 40-year-old you wants, and so that can be very difficult. And ultimately, I think most people have a goal. They say at least, all I want is to be happy. But how do you get happy, right? So a lot of people think it's making money. And to some degree, that's true. It's harder to be really happy if you're trying to make ends meet and that sort of thing. But there is a threshold that you get to money wise where each additional dollar has a very diminishing return. And I found that your goalposts move too, right? So if you're like, oh, if only I have this much money, then I'll be happy. Once you get that much money, it's going to be
You want
another,
more.
double that, and then double that, and double that. So it's really tricky. I found that whereas I always thought I'd be one of those people working crazy hours my entire life, I like to find a really nice balance. And if it's sunny out, I like to go outside into the sun and either run or go play pickleball, usually, or sit down and read or watch TV and do things other than just work. And to me, that's when I'm my happiest. And so. It's
That
hard
balance.
too, I think, for a lot of entrepreneurs because we're like, what can I do next? What can I do now? That sort of thing. So to actually kind of dial it back a little bit, and we're actually seeing kind of a movement, this calm company movement, where it's not working crazy hours, it's not being so stressed, that sort of thing. That it's not taking venture capital money where you have to grow, that sort of thing.
Yes, the
We're
American
seeing a lot
culture
more of
is
that, which is
definitely
exciting.
changing. Yes, yes. Our culture is definitely slowly changing towards that work-life balance, which I love seeing because, like you said, at the end of the day, no matter how much money or how much success you have, ultimately that doesn't result or it doesn't mean happiness. And of course, that's a whole other discussion we can have for hours. It's going to mean something
Sure.
else for every different person. But if so, you found kind of your balance, and that's what you're saying. That's what that means for you to have a
Yeah, I mean,
fulfilling,
look, it's a
happy life.
constant struggle, right? I'm always trying to be happier and trying to figure that out. It's not easy to do, but yeah.
Awesome. Now, if somebody was following you around as an entrepreneur, what does your day to day look like?
Mm, mm.
A typical
Yeah,
day.
yeah. I wake up and then I go straight to the computer. Usually, I'll take a few minutes to stretch or whatever, but I go straight to the computer, and then I'd say I spend 2 or 3 hours on the computer. Usually writing stories for my blog, checking email, that sort of thing. One reason I know that I like what I do is I actually really enjoy opening up my email, right? To see what's in there, right? I'm like, what opportunities are there today? That sort of thing.
Wow.
And then after that, I don't eat breakfast, so I skip breakfast. I get right on that, and then I usually eat an early lunch, and then my afternoons are a lot calmer, right? I'll either work out or play pickleball, and then it's kind of coming back and forth between work and that. So an hour here, an hour there, an hour here, an hour there. But yeah, I would say that's kind of what my typical day looks like as an entrepreneur. I try to write at least 2 blog posts a day. Sometimes it's more like this morning, as an example here, when we're recording this, I think I've done 4
Wow.
blog posts. They're fairly short, but 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 4 today, whereas yesterday I only had 2. But that's my goal. That's my daily goal on weekdays. And then I spend, as podcasting takes a lot more time than the actual recording is. Even if you outsource, I have an editor who outsources. So I spend a lot of time working on that as well.
Excellent. Now, for our listeners who are entrepreneurs or who are thinking about starting a business and they came to the point where they need to pick a domain name. Now,
Mm-hmm.
what would that process be? Because I know as a entrepreneur who had a startup a while ago, first I needed to do the research, come up with the name. You need to check a lot of different things before you kind of set your name and domain name. What have you seen? What are your advice based on your research and
Sure,
experience on that
sure.
whole thing? Because I think that in today's world, picking your business name and your domain name is goes hand in hand. They do need
Oh,
to be
sure.
the
Yeah,
same or similar.
absolutely.
So can you talk a little bit about that, the trademark and all that fun stuff?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, well, I can give you an example. I just bought a domain today for a new business. I don't want to disclose today what that domain is, but I can talk about the process going through, right? And
Okay.
so I had an idea for a business, and so I knew the topic. And to me, again, the name of the business was going to be the domain name. It's an online business. So I did a lot of brainstorming. I looked up, what are just some things that come to mind that would be good names for this site. And then when I'd find a particular name or word that I liked for it, I'd throw it into a thesaurus and find some synonyms that might be there. And all the domain names I'm looking for, I'm not looking for one that's available, which may sound odd. I'm looking for one that I can buy from someone else, from a domain investor of some sort.
Oh, interesting. Why is that?
Well, it's most of the better names are going to already be registered. And
I
so,
see.
look, if you can find an available name, great. Go register that for $15 or whatever. But it's really hard. It's hard to do that, right? Especially if you're looking for something in .com. And so I go to marketplace sites where domains are for sale too, and put in the main keyword of my topic and see what's for sale and how much they're for. I think a lot of people think when they buy a
That's a great
domain name,
strategy, actually.
yeah,
That's a
yeah,
great strategy
it's kind
because
of
you're
the
giving me
opposite
good
of what a lot of
ideas.
people do, right? They're looking for what's available, but people have come up with some great ideas and they've already registered these domains, and they aren't. A lot of people say, "Oh, domains are so expensive when someone else owns them," but the typical domain someone else owns you can buy for $2,000 to $5,000. I'm saying
Yeah.
typical,
And that's not
not
a
not
lot
not
if you have a business plan and a business who looks like it's gonna return that investment within a
well,
couple
I
of
mean,
years.
compare that to how much you're going to spend on marketing and developing your
Yeah.
website and that sort of thing. It's just a small fraction, and a lot of
Yeah.
domain sellers will even let you pay it off over time too. So, $100 a month, and if the business doesn't work out, you can stop paying and you just give the domain back, right? You don't owe any more money. So yeah, for me, just looking for already registered domain names based on a keyword is a great way to find a site name, and that's part of what I did in this case. And then once I came up with a short list, I emailed a lot of friends and said, "Hey, here's what I'm building. Here are some potential names. Which ones do you like?" And I got a lot of different opinions. So in some ways it's helpful, and some it's not. But some people pointed out some things that I hadn't thought of, and this is why it's so important to do this. They're like, there's another site that uses a name similar to this that's adult in nature, and people might
Mm,
confuse you with that. So obviously, I didn't want that. Um, it's also good to call people and say, "Hey, I'm thinking about this name for my site," and then making sure they can recite it to you and spell it. And we call that the radio test. And that's basically if we're, say, on a podcast and I tell you my website, can you spell that, right? So some people are like, "Oh, I'll register this domain and I'll leave out the vowels," right? So it looks like a cool name, but then no one can find it, right? They can't type
yes,
it in, they
it's hard to
misspell it, they
find.
show up at a different site. So things like that, checks like that. And then finally, and you can change the order on this a little bit, but is trademark checks. And you can do some basic ones to rule. I would say you can do it yourself to rule names out. But then you want to hire a trademark attorney to screen the name if it's something that potentially has a trademark issue. So, you can search the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office for trademarks. Another thing is, Google is kind of a good trademark search because if you put that name in and someone else is already using it, even if they don't have the domain and they're using it for the same exact thing you want to do, you want to avoid that.
Of
Um,
course.
so doing that trademark check before you finally buy it. The name for this business that I would say most people like the most. Once I went to go buy it, I'm like, okay, I know how much the domain is. I started searching around. I'm like, ooh, this might have some trademark issues, and then I confirmed that with a trademark attorney before moving forward. And so I chose a different name for that reason.
Excellent. That's great advice for people who are starting out because that's also one thing we want to avoid. We don't want to start this whole business, get all this marketing material, even, do a lot of work. Then somebody ends up suing you or coming after you because you haven't done your research with the trademark. And it's not common knowledge to go through an attorney to do that. But again, like Andrew mentioned about investing for a good domain name, that's also investing to protect your business, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what you're
It's better to do
building.
that now than later. And you know, I understand that some people are like, "Hey, I'm trying this business out. I don't know if it will work." So it's natural to kind of skip some of those steps. And I get that. I mean, I will say like buying one domain now that's subpar and switching to another one later, that's really hard. You know,
Yeah.
it's hard technically, but it's harder with the SEO aspects of it, right? In fact, so the company that created WordPress has a service called WooCommerce. It's kind of this huge part of their business, and it's basically creating online shops on WordPress sites. And they recently rebranded from WooCommerce to just Woo, WOO. And they managed to buy woo.com, WOO.com, and they switched their domain name from woocommerce.com to Woo. And now they're switching back because they're having so many SEO issues. And
Yeah.
so even a big company like that struggles with switching domains. So I know it's tempting to just, you know, get a basic inexpensive domain name right now and switch, but if you can't afford a better name, there's definitely some value to doing that.
So, just to clarify, are you currently working with people to help them buy and find business names?
I do not do that.
Okay.
I mean,
You're
if a
doing it for
friend,
yourself.
yeah, if a friend asks for help or refers someone to me, that sort of thing. There are services out there that do that. Name Ninja is a good one. They help lots of companies acquire domain names, social media handles, that sort of thing. And so they will help both with the naming process, but more so even with just in case that domain name is not listed for sale somewhere, tracking down the buyer, negotiating it, dealing with all that sort of stuff.
Oh, thank you for sharing that resource. Well, before we close our podcast, I would love to ask you some final questions.
Sure.
A fun one is if you can go back and redo it all over again, back from when you were in college, what are some of the things that you would do differently?
Sure. You know, I try not to look back and say, "Oh, if only I would have done this," and look forward. But you know, I guess getting back to the thing, you know, it would have been great, especially you know, in hindsight, in the late '90s, to learn a bit about coding. You know, because you know the world has changed a lot in the past 20 something
Yes.
years. And then I would say just I wish I would have taken some more risks around business. You know, I was always very conservative about it and careful, and I wish I would have taken more chances. I think some of those would have paid off as well.
And I think those are actually great advice for our listeners because, you know, we learn as we go. And when we look back, I guess a better question would be what are some things that you've learned that other people can benefit from? And
Mm,
those would be the
yeah,
things.
yeah. Well, you know, I think one thing is to try to stop comparing yourself to other people, uh, and it's hard
Oh,
to
yeah.
do, but you'll never be happy. You know, I know people who have immense wealth, but they hang out with people who have more wealth, and are always comparing themselves to
Yeah,
those
it's never
people.
going to be enough.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So, and you know, caring less about what people think about you. I think there's a limit to that, right? You don't want to be like a jerk, right? Like I don't care, so I'm a jerk to people. But you know, worrying less about that and you know their opinion, you know, and focusing more on what makes you happy.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Now, before we close, can you please tell people where they can find you? I know we've mentioned that, but if you can mention last time where people can find you for all the, you know, creative work you've done and
Sure.
also your last words of encouragement.
Sure. The best way is just to go to domainnamewire.com or dnw.com for short. We'll take you there. You can find my contact information there as well as my Twitter handle, socials, all that sort of stuff. And then a last word of encouragement would be just get started. Take the first step on your business journey and get it out there and then collect feedback. Don't get stuck in analysis paralysis. Go take that first step to get your business started.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for your time, Andrew. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Until next time, bye. Thank you for listening. Please rate and review this podcast. Follow and engage with us on social media under the Yegi Project. And if you're interested in being a guest, email info@theyegiproject.com. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes.